Dan Humphrey from Gossip Girl begins as the lonely boy from Brooklyn, the outsider who claims to hate the Upper East Side superficiality. He presents himself as morally superior, intellectually deep, and emotionally sincere. But as the series unfolds, we start seeing cracks in that carefully built identity. His judgments toward others often hide his own insecurities. What looks like sensitivity slowly starts to resemble self-absorption. And the boy who criticizes narcissism becomes its most subtle embodiment. Dan constantly positions himself as the victim of wealth and privilege, yet he desperately craves entry into that same world. His resentment toward the elite masks an intense desire to be accepted by them. Instead of rejecting the system, he studies it, mimics it, and ultimately manipulates it. His ambition is never purely about love or belonging, it's about recognition. He doesn't just want to be seen, he wants to be admired. That hunger quietly drives most of his decisions. His relationships reveal even more about him. Whether it's Serena, Vanessa, Blair, or anyone else, Dan often loves the idea of them more than the reality. He romanticizes women as characters in his narrative rather than accepting them as flawed individuals. When they don't match his expectations, he withdraws or criticizes. His affection seems conditional, tied to how they make him feel about himself. When admiration fades, so does his devotion. The ultimate revelation that Dan is Gossip Girl reframes everything. The anonymous blogger who exposed secrets, ruined reputations, and controlled narratives was not an outsider seeking justice. He was a participant orchestrating chaos to climb the social ladder. He weaponized information not for truth, but for power. In doing so, he proves that his morality was always selective. He judged others harshly while secretly doing worse. By the end of the show, Dan achieves what he always wanted: entry, validation, and authorship of the elite story. But the journey reveals a painful truth: Dan Humphrey doesn't truly love people. He loves what they represent. He loves the elevation they offer him. Most of all, he loves the narrative of himself, the misunderstood genius who outsmarted everyone. And that may be the most narcissistic twist of all. 1. He turns people into characters instead of partners. Dan is a writer first and a lover second. He doesn't fall in love with real people, he falls in love with stories. Serena becomes his muse, Blair becomes his intellectual equal, and everyone else becomes material. Instead of engaging emotionally, he observes analytically. He studies their flaws, habits, and weaknesses. He sees potential plotlines where others see vulnerability. That distance allows him to remain detached. In his relationships, he often seems more fascinated than emotionally invested. He idealizes Serena as the golden girl who needs saving. He romanticizes Blair as the powerful queen who secretly longs for depth. But when reality intrudes, when Serena disappoints him or Blair chooses someone else, he reacts not with empathy, but with resentment. It's as if the character broke script. Dan frequently writes about his friends without consent. He exposes their secrets under the guise of art. He convinces himself that truth matters more than loyalty. But true love protects, it doesn't publish. When someone becomes more valuable as a chapter than as a human being, that's not love. That's self-serving storytelling. Even when confronted, he defends himself intellectually. He argues that writers must be ruthless. He hides behind ambition. He justifies betrayal as honesty. But honesty without compassion becomes cruelty. His relationships are filtered through ego. If someone enhances his self-image, he invests. If they threaten it, he distances himself. That pattern repeats again and again. It shows that his primary commitment isn't to love, it's to legacy. Dan doesn't want connection, he wants content. He doesn't want intimacy, he wants inspiration. That subtle distinction reveals his emotional priorities. Love requires surrender. Dan never surrenders. He always narrates. And the narrator always stays in control. 2. He judges the elite while secretly wanting to be them. From the beginning, Dan criticizes the Upper East Side for being shallow and corrupt. He mocks their privilege. He calls out their hypocrisy. He acts morally superior. But beneath that criticism lies envy. Dan wants access. He wants recognition. He wants their validation. His resentment isn't rooted in justice, it's rooted in exclusion. He hates being outside more than he hates what's inside. Instead of rejecting their system, he infiltrates it. He dates Serena. He befriends Nate. He grows close to Blair. He slowly embeds himself. Each step upward fuels his pride. He condemns their wealth, yet benefits from their connections. He criticizes their manipulation, yet becomes the biggest manipulator of all as Gossip Girl. His hypocrisy becomes impossible to ignore. When he publishes scathing pieces about them, it isn't moral protest, it's strategic positioning. He establishes himself as the intellectual observer. The one who sees through them. The one who is different. But difference becomes superiority in his mind. He doesn't just want equality, he wants dominance. He wants to prove he's smarter than the people born into power. In the end, he doesn't dismantle their world, he joins it. And that reveals the truth. His criticism was never about principle. It was about access. That's not love for justice. That's ambition disguised as righteousness. 3. He weaponizes Gossip Girl for personal gain. The biggest proof of Dan's self-love is his identity as Gossip Girl. For years, he anonymously controlled narratives. He exposed secrets. He destroyed reputations. He shaped perceptions. He hurt Serena repeatedly, the woman he claimed to love. He humiliated Blair. He exposed Jenny. He manipulated everyone. If love were real, protection would be instinctive. But Dan prioritizes influence over loyalty. Gossip Girl gives him power. And power becomes addictive. He justifies it as storytelling. He frames it as social commentary. But the reality is simpler, it elevates him. Through Gossip Girl, he becomes omniscient. He sees everything. He controls everything. He sits above the world that once excluded him. That godlike position feeds his ego. He isn't the lonely boy anymore. He's the architect. He risks others' mental health, reputations, and relationships for the sake of the narrative. That level of detachment shows emotional coldness. In choosing power over people, Dan reveals his hierarchy of love. And at the top of that hierarchy stands himself. 4. His love is conditional on admiration. Dan thrives when he is admired intellectually or morally. When Serena looks at him as different from other men, he glows. When Blair respects his mind, he leans in. Admiration fuels him. Without it, his affection fades. He struggles when partners challenge him. When Serena acts independently, he judges her. When Blair returns to Chuck, he lashes out. His love feels transactional. He wants to be the savior. The enlightened one. The morally grounded one. That dynamic places him above his partners emotionally. True love accepts equality. Dan prefers hierarchy. He becomes distant when he feels insecure. Instead of communicating vulnerability, he retreats into criticism. His disappointment often sounds like superiority. That tone erodes intimacy. He expects growth from others but rarely acknowledges his own flaws. He punishes people emotionally when they stop reflecting his idealized vision. Love that depends on admiration isn't unconditional. It's ego-driven. 5. He rewrites history to protect his image. Dan carefully crafts how others see him. He positions himself as the outsider hero. He edits his own narrative. Even when exposed as Gossip Girl, he reframes it as genius rather than cruelty. He believes his intentions justify outcomes. He avoids full accountability by intellectualizing harm. He romanticizes manipulation as strategy. He convinces himself he was exposing truth. But truth without consent is violation. He wants to be remembered as brilliant, not harmful. His self-perception matters more than others' pain. Image preservation becomes more important than apology. That's self-love in its most defensive form. 6. He thrives on being the different one. He builds identity around being unlike the elite. He clings to uniqueness as superiority. He looks down on their superficiality. He treats his depth as currency. He needs contrast to feel special. If everyone is flawed, he must be enlightened. That mindset isolates him emotionally. It prevents humility. It prevents equal vulnerability. He cannot simply be, he must be exceptional. And that constant self-focus reinforces ego. 7. He exploits emotional access. He gains trust easily. People confide in him. He listens carefully. But sometimes he uses that knowledge strategically. Private truths become public tools. That betrayal shows detachment. It reveals calculation. Love does not weaponize intimacy. Dan often does. 8. He prioritizes legacy over loyalty. His writing career always comes first. If a relationship conflicts with ambition, ambition wins. He risks friendships for publication. He exposes personal details for acclaim. He believes success validates sacrifice. But sacrifice is rarely his own. Others pay the emotional cost. Legacy becomes more important than love. 9. He resents when he isn't chosen. When Serena wavers, he grows bitter. When Blair chooses Chuck, his ego cracks. Rejection wounds him deeply. Instead of grieving quietly, he retaliates subtly. His pride can't tolerate being second. He internalizes rejection as injustice. That response centers himself rather than respecting others' choices. 10. He always needs to win the narrative. Dan doesn't just want happiness, he wants the final word. He wants authorship of the story. He wants the reveal. He wants control of perception. Even love becomes a storyline to conclude triumphantly. Winning matters. Control matters. Being remembered as mastermind matters. And when narrative victory outranks emotional sincerity, self-love dominates. Dan Humphrey's journey in Gossip Girl is one of transformation, but not necessarily growth. He begins as the relatable outsider and ends as the calculated insider. The reveal that he orchestrated the chaos all along forces us to reconsider every tender moment. Was it love, or was it research? Was it connection, or was it positioning? His character reflects a deeper theme: insecurity can masquerade as morality. Dan's superiority complex is built on years of feeling excluded. But instead of healing that insecurity, he feeds it with ambition. Instead of choosing authenticity, he chooses authorship. He doesn't just want to be loved, he wants to be central. That doesn't make him purely evil. It makes him human. Insecurity, ambition, envy, and pride are deeply relatable flaws. But Dan allows them to dominate his relationships. He rarely sacrifices power for love. He rarely protects others at his own expense. His evolution isn't about becoming kinder, it's about becoming smarter. In the end, Dan gets everything: status, Serena, recognition, and authorship of the Upper East Side. He wins. But the way he wins reveals who he truly is. The lonely boy didn't just want acceptance, he wanted control. And control is often the opposite of love. Dan Humphrey doesn't love recklessly. He doesn't love selflessly. He loves strategically. And while he may feel affection, admiration, and attachment, the person he consistently protects, prioritizes, and elevates is himself. That's the quiet tragedy of his character. He becomes exactly what he once claimed to despise.